All right, we're live.
Sweet.
Yeah. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the March 2024 stream. Today we have a little bit of a special treat because aside from the Q&A, which we will get to, and we're going to do something very similar. We're also going to talk about, this is pretty breaking news, but there was a pretty urgent security issue with some Linux distributions, most likely a backdoor put into the Linux operating system, and we wanted to quickly touch on that before we get into the Q&A, just because we can. And then maybe people have more questions about that too, so that can be an aspect of the Q&A. We only have one question from one of our patrons, so we're going to tackle that question first. Then we're going to talk about the security of Linux and what's going on there. Then we're going to go ahead and address the forum questions for the normal Q&A. And then we'll finish out, as always, with our live chat on the YouTube side of things. And that's all I got before we get started. Anything you want to say, Jonah?
No, sounds good.
All right. So let me pull it up because this was actually a DM. We didn't have any public posts, unfortunately, on our Patreon Q&A. So if you want to be a part of that next month, that's the largest priority. Definitely check that out on patreon.com/techlore. But someone sent a DM. I assume they don't want their name shown. It starts with an M. But it says, I have a question for the next QA. I'm looking for a privacy respecting mobile payment solution for Android phones, basically Google Pay without Google. I appreciate your input. Best. And I read it out to Jonah right before we started, and I mean, it's sad, but like my response is like, good luck. Mainly because I don't know of anything that exists outside of using some kind of third-party service like privacy.com, and that's for transactions within your phone. That's not to actually conduct transactions like at stores as you would with Google Pay or Apple Pay. And Google really restricts, this is a Google thing, Google heavily restricts if you're on a rooted device, if you're on a custom ROM, if you're on anything that's not stock Android, um, with Google Play services, they're not going to let you use Google Pay. I don't know if you have any experience with any alternatives, but I actually don't even know where to start with this.
Well, that's not entirely true on Google's side of things, actually.
Okay.
Android does have an API where apps can choose to implement their own NFC payments, which is very different from like the iOS side of thing. I didn't know too much about it because here in the US, I don't know of any banks or other apps that use this API. And so I kind of thought it was the same as what you were saying, where it was just kind of locked down on Android basically, and only big OEMs like Samsung could maybe make an alternative because, of course, there's Samsung Pay. But it is available as an option to banks. It's just very uncommon. I haven't found a single example. I was asking around and can't find any in the US. I do know, though, that in the EU, some banks do support NFC payments within their app rather than using another service. And so all of that would go directly through the bank's infrastructure rather than relying on Google. Um, so that's pretty much your only option. It really comes down to what your payment method supports. And in the US, like I said, I have been looking around a lot. I can't find a single instance of any third-party app supporting it. Everyone just seems to be on the Google Pay train. And it's just a couple of banks in the EU seem to do their own thing, from what I've seen.
Makes sense.
So that's pretty much your only option. But yeah, not a lot of good options, unfortunately.
Yeah. I guess the only alternative, always you have the option to use your cards as they are. And if you're really extra for whatever reason, you really need a Google Pay, you're looking to maybe just carry around a second phone that supports it. That's the only option. Oh, you know what? I wonder if you have like a custom ROM with like a Google, is it a Pixel Watch? I wonder if you can get Google Pay running on the watch. As long as you have a phone at home to like get it set up and linked, maybe you're able to pay remotely with the watch if it has cellular, but then you still need a watch. It's not an ideal situation.
You might be able to. The problem with Google Pay from like a privacy perspective, I made a whole video about this
Yeah.
on my channel, but there's basically it runs everything through Google servers, all the transactions. So there's some limited offline use where you can like get some they call them tokens that you can save to your phone and then make payments offline, like with that set amount of tokens before you have to refresh what you have from Google servers, but eventually you have to make a reconnection to Google servers. So when you're using any Google Pay product like that, or maybe it's Google Wallet now. I heard they just renamed again.
Of course.
That was in the news.
Why
I
would they
don't know
have
what it's called,
consistent
but
branding?
you guys know what I mean. When you're using Google's services, it pretty much does require a connection to Google servers to get like the authentication and connect with the bank. Everything goes through them, which is in contrast to like Apple Wallet, for example, which works more like cloning your card onto your phone. So Apple Wallet works completely offline, and transaction data isn't um, shared with Apple in that case. So
Right.
that's kind of the difference between them. But on the Android side of things with Google Pay, you do have that connection, no matter how you use Google Pay, which you should probably think about if you're worried about Google seeing your transactions.
Right. And actually, before we get, because we're about to hop into Linux backdoor situation, um, I I need to look into it more. I told you I don't really watch many YouTubers, outside of my Judge Judy Lunch Crew episodes. Um, but I have actually found a blogger I unironically really enjoy following, and it's Birch Tree, I think is what it's called. And he recently put out a a little thing about how finances work between Stripe and Apple and why the whole thing in the EU is such a big deal and how Apple like really overcharges developers. And just it wasn't a privacy article, but he actually talked about how Apple advertises the privacy benefits of Apple Pay because it generates like a unique card. But there's a whole thing, I forgot what it's called, but he talked about how there's actually a unique identifier that companies can still use through Apple Pay to still track essentially who you are. And I want to look more into it. Is all I'm gonna say. So if I find anything interesting, it could be a fun video that I might make about it. Because he really got into the nitty gritty of how Apple Pay worked. So I want to see what that's about. Could be interesting.
And you're talking about like merchants that you use Apple Pay with tracking you, like
Yes.
tracking you between stores and that kind of thing.
Yes, like there's a different unique identifier that's tied to those transactions that could very easily be correlated, that Apple doesn't really talk about. So it still
Yeah,
protects your card info, but it doesn't protect the privacy of the consumer when it comes to like their habits, so to speak. Um,
that definitely is the case. I'll have to watch that video. That sounds really interesting.
it was his blog.
My understanding, oh, it's a blog. Okay. My understanding is that Apple Pay, when you add a card, it generates a new card number, but that
Hmm.
card number remains static on like a per device basis. So that would be my guess as to what
It's
he's
it's a
talking
different thing.
about, and that's definitely a case.
It's a
Could be a
different
different
thing.
thing.
Yeah,
That'll be interesting though.
yeah, because I was under that same impression. So it's something I'll look more into.
But there is still that tracking vector as well. We'll have to look more into
Yeah,
it.
yeah, we'll chat on Signal. um, Now, before we transition into the Q&A, and again, the way this works for people who haven't joined before, we're going to do the forum posts first. You can join a link if there's still time. So if you want to ask a question and you want us to pretty much guaranteed get back to it as long as it's appropriate and it follows the rules, you can join our forum in a description right now on YouTube. Just leave your comment there. We'll probably close it in like 15 minutes or so. And then after that, we'll go into the live chat if we have any extra time. But before we do that, we really want to talk about this Linux backdoor because a lot of people are asking about it. Now, I asked Jonah beforehand because I don't know how much research he did into it. So I just want to start this off by saying this is very preliminary. Even the primary sources and what we know, what we're capable of knowing right now is very limited in scope. It's still unfolding. People are still doing analysis on this, and there's just a lot of mixed questions. So we might get some things wrong, but we're going to try to relay what we do know and what we don't know as best we can. And with that, I just quickly read through this blog article that's linked on our forum. Jonah's done a little bit more than me, so I'm going to ask Jonah some questions, kind of with some of the context of what I know. So I'm going to pry. I haven't talked to Jonah about this yet, so I'm also trying to learn here along with everybody else. So this was posted, I guess, by Red Hat. Did Red Hat discover this, or did someone?
Uh, no, this was discovered on the OpenWall firewall like mailing list, I believe, is where it was originally reported, and then they also reported it to Red Hat. And Red Hat is the organization that assigned like the CVE number and kind of handled the disclosure from there. But it
Got
was
it.
originally posted to this mailing list.
Got it. And so my first thought when I saw this was, oh, it's security alert for those using Fedora and Fedora Rawhide and all these different variations. And so my first thought is, oh, it's a security issue with Fedora users. But very quickly reading into it, it actually has nothing directly to do with Fedora. it seems to be a library that Fedora utilizes along with many other Linux distributions that was actually impacted. So what is that library? What does it do? And who likely uses that library? And who actually installed the malicious version of the library that you know of?
Yeah. So the library is called XZ, and it's basically a compression library. So programs can use another library that calls XZ in order to compress data, basically. And it's very widely used in the Linux space. A lot of different projects use it. Originally, when this vulnerability was reported, they thought it was actually Debian specific, because that was where they originally encountered the issue. But then it turned out to affect a lot of different distributions as well, which is why it also got reported to Red Hat Security and all these other people. And now a lot of people are investigating it. Um, the main vulnerability that was found with this was a backdoor into SSH. And the way that it worked is this XZ library isn't used by SSH directly, which means that the SSH maintainers probably never would have it never would have been on their radar. But on some systems like Debian and Fedora, for example, they patch SSH to give it compatibility with systemd, and then that service that they're hooking into a systemd with uses XZ. So it's kind of this chain where if you have this installed and you have SSH installed, you're actually not impacted with the SSH vulnerability specifically. So, for example, Arch Linux also had the compromised version of this in their package manager, but SSH on Arch Linux wasn't backdoored because they don't do the patch for systemd support in SSH that Debian and Fedora do, for example. Um, just to give you an idea. But this was a backdoor that was added to the release of XZ by the maintainer of XZ, and it had made it into pretty much all package managers across the board. So if you used a rolling release distro like Arch, like OpenSUSE, Tumbleweed, any of those other distros that get package updates immediately, it was pretty much already on the systems. It was actually even pushed to other non-Linux distros like macOS, for example, if you use Homebrew. XZ, the compromised version, was pushed there. The backdoor seems to be Linux specific, so I don't think that a lot of people have to worry about it, but it was out there pretty much. And the only thing that was kind of preventing it from being widespread was that all of these distros like Debian and Fedora and Ubuntu um, have like static releases where they don't update until the next version, right? So if you were on the current Fedora 39, you didn't have the compromised version of XZ, so you wouldn't be impacted. But the Fedora 40 beta came out, I think, 4 days ago. And so if you were on that beta, you would be affected. And then, if, of course, if you're on Fedora Rawhide, which is the rolling release version, you'd be impacted. Um, and yeah, it was pretty much in all of the rolling releases. It was in all of the betas, and it would have been on all of the Linux systems within a matter of weeks or months, most likely, if it hadn't been caught, which is pretty crazy.
Right. And I saw some people on Mastodon talking about this, and it looked like it was stumbled on very accidentally. Like someone
Yeah.
was just troubleshooting an issue that they were having, and they dug a little bit more into it to figure out what was happening. And they were like, this seems a little weird. And then they dug into it more and they started discovering this. It wasn't even a security researcher, as far as I know. Um, is that what happened?
Yeah. Yeah, the original report to the OpenWell forum was made by, I think he's a Postgres developer at Microsoft, maybe? Don't quote me on that. But he works with databases basically, and he was investigating why there was lower performance on these updated systems with the databases and stuff. And he traced it down to basically SSH for some reason was using a lot of CPU time, even though like it was denying requests. So usually like you'd see some CPU usage if you log into SSH and use it. But even when SSH like denied a request to log in from like an unauthorized person, which is just supposed to cut it off and then obviously not keep running, it was still calling this backdoor in the background that apparently wasn't very well coded. And so it was using a lot of resources basically. And that's how digging into the source code, it was discovered. But he was pretty much just benchmarking the performance of a completely unrelated program on Linux and happened to stumble into it. It was just kind of a lot of coincidences that got set up into finding this. It wasn't really found by anyone in the security space at all.
Right. And then before I kind of like go into like the takeaways for this, I think I had the question too of what, like, let's say this was rolled out to all Linux users, what would the impact, what would the impact have been? What does that mean? Like someone could SSH into their computer and do whatever they wanted? Does it mean if they only used SSH, the SSH tunnel would be like what would have been the repercussions for an average end user if this actually rolled out?
Yeah, so the way what it does precisely, I don't know if they've actually like completely figured it out yet. They're still looking into it, but pretty much what happened is when SSH was run, it ran some code in the background in the pre-authorization stage of this SSH connection. So it started running before you even authenticated or anything, basically. Any random person could have connected with SSH, no matter if they have credentials, and then this code would have executed, and that would have either potentially let them authenticate into SSH anyways if they sent some data, or it would have allowed them most likely to execute some remote code on the machine. Either way, it seems to be pretty much a situation where this would have allowed an attacker to execute anything on the machine that they'd like, basically.
Wow, that's pretty
So it
insane.
would not have been great, and it
Not
would have
good.
been pretty much installed everywhere if it wasn't for this being caught.
Yeah, pretty crazy. Um, I'm really curious for your takes because my first my first reaction when I saw this was this is why we always say like open source isn't everything. I went into it a little bit more pessimistic. I was like, yeah, this is like who actually verifies the code of what they run? Like please, someone in the comments tell me you actually went through and inspected all the code of all the open source software you use and that you have the expertise to do that. I know I don't. Maybe I can go through and see if there's anything obviously ridiculous, but I would never have caught something like this, and I doubt many people would have ever caught that. Even security researchers didn't catch it. Someone stumbled onto it by accident. So I think that we can't be too complacent with open source software because there is always this risk. And for all we know, there's actually 5 other backdoors like this in Linux that we just don't know about. For all we know. Again, I'm not saying there is. There's no evidence for that. I'm just saying, like, theoretically, like, who's actually like verifying this? And there are people who do try to go through and verify this, and those are the security researchers. But I'm just saying that, like, it's not a foolproof system because this actually did slip up and ended up on people's computers. Granted, not public releases for many things, but this is a pretty big deal. But then I
Mhm.
started reading more of the optimistic side of things, which is if it weren't for the open source nature of this would have just easily snuck in and been there till the end of time. And I saw some people on Mastodon talking about how, yeah, it was kind of lucky. We just caught this very, very luckily. But I don't know, like, what are your stances on this? Because I think, yeah, it's overall always a win in my eyes for something to be open source if it can be, but it's never a guarantee that that's going to be more private, more secure, and sometimes even more transparent if depending on the context of the open source software, I guess. So, curious for your thoughts.
Yeah, it's absolutely, I mean, not a guarantee, and this kind of proves it. One of the most interesting events that happened in this whole saga is that the maintainer of this XZ library for the past 2 years, I think their GitHub username was like Gia T something, some numbers. Um, they submitted a pull request to a Google project that checks for security issues in a bunch of other open source projects. Basically saying like disable this check on this project because it's incompatible with the project or something, and Google maintainers merged that PR. This was a long time ago. It was merged, and that check is actually what would have caught the backdoor. So in this case, the maintainer literally disabled the checks that would have caught this, but at Google's side of things, anyways.
Does anyone know who this person
Um,
is? The maintainer?
no, not as far as I know. People have looked into it. No social media presence or anything. To be honest with you, it's pretty rare that I would like really attribute this to like state actors in my mind, but in this case, it really seems like the most plausible explanation because if you think about like what kind of threat actors would maybe be interested in adding a backdoor like this and doing it in the way that this happened, it really doesn't line up for it to be anyone else because we're talking about an open source maintainer who had been maintaining the XZ library or the XZ program for 2 years now, I believe, and presumably to become a maintainer, they had probably been making plenty of contributions before that. And so it's a very long-term play,
Right.
basically, to become a very trusted maintainer and then eventually add this backdoor, which
Crazy.
in all likelihood never would have been caught. It was clearly a very long-term and sophisticated play that if you're thinking about like malware developers, for example, that's not something that you're going to do just to run some ransomware on people's computers, for example. It's not something that really anybody else has a motivation to do. And so when you think about it like that, I think I definitely take the more optimistic view, which is that the only reason that we found this ahead of time is because all of these projects were open source. I think that this could have just as easily happened to a closed source project, and in that case, we would not have found this backdoor until it had already been on all the systems and it had already, been a widespread catastrophe, basically. And we just narrowly avoided a catastrophe in this case. But
Right.
if you think about like the kind of software developer, possibly some agent of a nation state intelligence agency who wants to add a backdoor into programs that connect to SSH in a very sophisticated way like this, if they wanted to do the same sort of attack on a system like Windows or Mac OS, and you're going to be spending over 2 years dedicated to doing this, that's something that I mean, you can get hired as a software developer at Microsoft or Apple in 2 years and become a trusted employee at that time and do this kind of stuff in releases of closed source software. Closed source software is not immune to rogue developers or maintainers adding
It's
things into it that the company might not know about. And without being able to externally check this kind of thing, like what happened here, I really don't think it would have been caught until it was already in a release with this kind of software, is what I really think.
right. Great points. And I think also it doesn't have to be like they have to act like they're an engineer for Google for 2 years. It's as simple as just bribing the employee.
Yeah, it could be that as
It's
well.
as simple as bribing an employee.
There's there's a lot of vectors where
Yeah.
like a well-resourced adversary could add stuff like this to any program. It's not specific to open source. And it's
Right.
certainly not a situation like the University of Minnesota situation with Linux, for example, where some people were leaving drive-by commits that weren't caught and fixed. But
Yeah.
in this case, it was like the maintainer themselves that was adding all of these backdoors after they had gained a long period of trust. I really think that like the amount of time and dedication to making this backdoor, which was very sophisticated and very well hidden, and almost certainly wouldn't have been caught if it wasn't for what was pretty much a crazy set of situations and coincidences that led to it being found.
Right. Super
It's
interesting.
it's nuts.
Yeah. Well, like I said at the beginning, this is still very much unfolding. There's still a lot we don't know. So on our forum, discuss.techlore.tech, if we don't do a dedicated video on this, which I don't know if we will, given we just talked about it right now, that's the place to stay updated on it because I'm sure there's going to be more updates there. Now to the actual Q&A. Thanks everyone for your patience. We're going to go ahead and start with Anonymous. And we're going to go ahead and go through these. There's not actually that many, which is nice because we're almost halfway through already. So they said they have two longer topics. They said, as the feature of Signal usernames is on the horizon, even if they are disposable, I'm curious if you have any recommended methods or websites for generating creative and non-cringy usernames. I've mostly been using some dated and cringy usernames for my teenage years, and I'm looking for a more sophisticated and privacy-conscious approach for better compartmentalization. Um, I have a really quick answer to that. What I do when I'm generating usernames, I use Keepass, and Keepass actually has a username generation tool, and it gives you multiple options. You click generate username, at least in Strongbox. I don't know if every Keepass client does this, but in Strongbox, it gives you like random gibberish username. It gives you a like 1 word longer username with just like a random string, and it gives you like a hyphenated like 2 word one, and it also gives you one with like numbers or something. It gives you multiple options. That's what I use for all my usernames. Um, and you could probably do something similar with any password manager that has what is it, passphrases. Like you can just do a passphrase
Yeah.
generation for 2 words or something like that, and that can be the username you use. Do you do anything different?
No, I think that's absolutely the best way to handle like generating usernames like that. I would just add that in the case of Signal specifically, I really wouldn't
Yeah,
um,
good point.
overlook the fact that these usernames are disposable, and I probably wouldn't bother with generated usernames in this case, because you can make a username on a per contact basis, basically. So it really depends on like who you're giving your contact to. If it's someone you know in real life, there's no harm in just using your real name as a username and just giving it to them and then deleting the username after. You don't have to be private with that. And that kind of thing. You can just use whatever online identity you already have with whoever you're contacting and then give them that and then delete the username after you've established contact. But if you do want like a public signal username for whatever reason, if you have like a public profile online and you want anyone to contact you, if you just need a one static username, I think that that's a good option to generate one for sure.
Yeah. The second question here from Anonymous as well. What are your thoughts on WhatsApp's move to allow users to receive messages from other messaging apps to comply with the EU's DMA? Do you believe Meta will engage in a form of malicious compliance similar to Apple, doing the bare minimum? Furthermore, how likely is it that Google will consent to WhatsApp's terms under this new framework? I frankly haven't read too much into it and how they plan to interoperate, or if they plan. I assume they're not going to try to maintain end-to-end encryption if they interoperate, is my assumption, but maybe they will. I really don't know. I haven't looked into this, so I don't really want to comment too much about it. Have you looked into this at all?
No, I don't either. I feel like I've seen talk about like Matrix being used or something like that. Seems like Matrix is in a pretty good position in the EU right now as far as the DMA goes, so I'd be looking into that if I were Meta, but I have no idea what they're planning.
Yeah. Sorry, Anonymous. But
I mean, as far
yeah.
as the will they engage in a form of malicious compliance similar to Apple go, I guess I don't know too much about how Meta works to really say one way or the other, but to me, it wouldn't be surprising if they didn't do it the same way Apple did, because I feel like WhatsApp does not have like the global appeal of like the iPhone, for example. I think that it's a pretty EU specific app in my mind at least. Whereas like in North America, it's very uncommonly used. And so I don't know why they would bother like releasing two different versions of the app when the main market is the EU anyways. But that's my impression of it. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like WhatsApp is actually a very global thing, with the exception of the US, from what I've seen. It seems like most countries really have a heavy emphasis on WhatsApp as almost like the main messenger, from what I've seen.
Could be. I guess I'm not really familiar with what they use in like Asian countries, but if I think about like
Even South America.
other areas besides, I was just gonna say though, besides North America and the EU, is South America really a big market for Meta? Like, what's the
I
spend
assume
in that
so. Like
area?
in Brazil, huge population, and it's all WhatsApp there. And then there's Europe, and I think WhatsApp is a big deal for Facebook, honestly.
Maybe.
But I don't know. Yeah, we're doing our best.
Not familiar enough with what's up.
Yeah, yeah, we're making a lot of assumptions. So if anyone has some insight, definitely leave it um, in the stream. Do you want to take the next one? It's a regular. Thanks for being a regular. We have so many regulars now. So cool to see that.
Yeah, it's awesome. The blank space asked, well, they hope that we're both having a good day, and I am. Are you?
No, I am.
They say, I wish to ask, as you have both been in the privacy space for a number of years, what sort of privacy services and products do you think we are all missing out on? And would either of you, with your experience, ever be interested in setting up such a service or tool? Or do you both have a different set of goals for the future?
Do you want to
What do
start?
you think? What are you missing out on in the privacy
I'm
space?
missing out. It's not even the privacy space, but I just want a small phone that's privacy respecting. That's it. Like,
Yeah,
I just want a small phone, actually. Now that the Asus Zenfone
that
is
would be
gone.
nice. Have you seen, um, I guess I don't know how small it is, but I've seen a lot of posts about this e-ink phone on Kickstarter right now
I'm not
with
buying.
like a keyboard and a small
I'm not
display, and
buying
they're
anything
really
from
like selling it
Kickstarter.
as the minimal phone. No,
No.
but if it comes out, is that something you'd be interested in, or?
I don't want to hear if it comes out from Kickstarter, because what are the odds of that? Like, it's not even worth
I
discussing
don't
for me.
know. I
Um,
don't know how Kickstarter works.
yeah, I don't know. I just want a small phone that in any way somewhat respects my privacy. Even if it just ran like stock Android at this point, I might even consider that. It's not ideal, but
Hmm.
I'm desperate. How about you? Do you have any
Yeah, I'm really trying to think. I feel like, all of the stuff that I do, there are
decent alternatives? Yeah.
private alternatives. I'd really just want more, it's along the same lines as what you're saying, more hardware options. If I think beyond phones, something like a smartwatch, for example, would be nice.
Right. And it,
Outside of like an Apple ecosystem. Like if there's a Linux ecosystem for these things, I would love to be able to do everything you can do on like an iPhone on a Linux phone, for example, but I don't know. We're pretty far off of that right now.
right, I was just gonna say, well, like before I beat the people to it, like people who are going that, well, Pine Time and a Pine phone.
Yeah.
Why not? Like, why is that not for you?
Yeah. Well, I know you know that I've been like trying to use my iPhone a little bit, having some issues. Stuff that you brought up, like the battery life issue, where if it drains, you just can't turn it on anymore.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
that I spent a few hours trying to figure out. Um,
Like, I
it's
just want to
just
pause
like
right
it's
there.
cool.
People who say to unironically, you should just use a Pine phone. If your Pine phone dies, you literally can't boot it up. Full
Yeah.
stop. It will not boot up. It'll get in a boot loop, and you have to go through kind of some workarounds to be able to do it. Now, there are some more permanent solutions. I think you can like flash the bootloader to be something different that doesn't do that. But are you telling me
Yeah.
that, like, are you unironically telling me that I'm going to suggest a phone to someone I know that if they let it die, they won't be able to boot it back up without my help?
Hmm.
It's crazy. And by the way, like I think what Pine 64 is doing is amazing. But even they specifically advertise their phones to be more towards developers and a very niche audience. They're not advertising them as
Right.
like a end user product like Purism is. Um, and Pine will actually ship you a phone. So yeah, sorry, I totally
Absolutely.
took
I
over.
mean,
But
no, but that's pretty much the point I was gonna make, which is that like all of these Linux phones, smartwatches, other devices are only meant for Linux developers to be using. There aren't really any polished products out there at the moment
and
that you
enthusiasts.
can like recommend anyone to use, and the both the hardware and the software just isn't there yet, unfortunately. But if I was in like my perfect world, there would be a fantastic Linux operating system and fantastic Linux hardware for all of this stuff that I could use instead of um, these alternatives. But
I
we're not
agree.
there yet.
I agree. So I think to kind of almost combine our answers, what I would like to see to really answer the blank spaces question, why not both? A small Linux powered phone that was like what people think in their heads a Linux phone should be, which is a genuine competitor to iOS and Android that has fantastic app support and can genuinely be a compelling offering for a typical end user. I think that should be the goal. And the fact we're not there yet, it doesn't have to take away from people's hard work that they're already putting into Linux phones, because I know there's so much hard work going into it. So I don't think that, like, I think that's their goal as well. I think people at Pine 64 have that goal as well. And I think that's a good goal to have. And I wish it was ready
Yeah,
sooner, but it's a very ambitious thing to do.
just a matter of waiting. So, do you have any interest in starting the Techlore phone hardware company and selling a Linux phone?
I won't swear, but F no. Hell no. Like starting a phone company is
Yeah.
how you run something to the ground. Not if I say this all the time. If Amazon couldn't start a phone company, I don't think I can. So props to
So
anyone
true.
crazy enough to try, honestly.
Man, I forgot about that Fire phone. That was a disaster.
Did you see? There's an
And
update because the DOJ is suing Apple. They're actually now using the Fire phone as part of the antitrust lawsuit to say that the reason the Fire phone didn't succeed was because of Apple. And that like
wow,
feeds into Apple's
that is
monopoly.
surprising.
That is very surprising.
I
I would
could,
just say it just sucked as a phone, but I don't know, it's just me.
yeah, it definitely seems like it's on Amazon. I feel like the Microsoft phone would be a more compelling case.
I agree. Totally agree. 1000% agree. Because the Fire phone,
Yeah.
Amazon doesn't make good devices. Hot take. They just don't. Like everything they release comes with ads. It's like they literally sell the devices for cheaper than it costs to make because it's like they're trying to lock you into this crappy ecosystem. And it makes what like the Samsung ecosystem feel just really good. Just relative. I hated like the Fire tablets. I really it felt like the Fire phone was just the operating system of a Fire tablet on like a 3D
Yeah,
screen, and that was the whole selling point. It's
it
3D,
was.
guys.
But wasn't it like $700?
Yeah, yeah. It wasn't even cheap. It was weird, weird phone.
Right. Yeah,
Throwback.
that was a
um,
weird time.
yeah. Next question is from Backfield3779. Another regular. We have quite a few regulars. Ah, I'm so excited. Um,
Yes.
but they said, Henry, you've been using Keepass for a long time, but after Proton Pass was released, you said you started using it for some websites. Recently, you also stated that when Proton releases its desktop app, you might completely switch to Proton Pass. Am I right that for you, at least more recently, using Keepass has been less about valuing the control and offline experience of using Keepass and more just liking the UI compared to other open source password managers like Bitwarden, and that is why you've stuck with it? Also, since Bitwarden is currently working on a redesign and moving to native mobile apps, could it be an option that you'd consider? Okay, I feel like I can't really answer this question directly without just like telling a story. So, I used KeyPass originally because, yes, originally it was like I want like utmost control. I want to be able to sync things on my own. I want to be able to have an offline backup. I want to control all my passwords by myself. And this was way back in the day when I was using even like the normal KeyPass client, not even KeyPass XC. It's just the actual KeyPass client from KeyPass's website, which I'm sure they work hard on it, but for those who have used it, it's definitely a little bit rougher around the edges than something like KeyPass XE, Strongbox, or any other password managers that we commonly recommend back here to integrate with KeyPass. Um, but that's what I used. And then when I found KeyPass XE, that was a massive upgrade for me in my life. And then I also really like Strongbox as well. So those are kind of my two favorite KeyPass clients on desktop. And I just kind of stuck with it. It always worked. I really like KeyPass, and it's a solid offering. It's really dictated by the client you choose to use, though. If you have a nice client, KeyPass can be very enjoyable to use. If you don't have a nice client, it can really ruin your life, I feel. And I think Jonah might remember this, but I think about like a year and a half ago, I experimented with maybe setting up a password manager. So I tried 1Password, and I tried Bitwarden, and I couldn't get into them. I didn't like the interface for either of them, which I know is a hot take because a lot of people like 1Password's interface, and just like the general design of everything. I know you like it, Jonah, but I really didn't like it, and I actually felt like my user experience with my KeyPass clients was better, and that was really like the nail in the coffin for me because it was free, it was still controlled by me, and I felt like it was a better experience. Um, Now I tried Bitwarden recently, and I just can't get into it compared to my KeyPass client. But I really want to. I want more of the convenience because now that I have a better understanding of how these password managers work, I don't really think they're inherently less safe necessarily. I always think that rolling it your own, having it offline is safer than using something cloud based. But when you understand how end to end encryption works and how these things are zero knowledge and all the encryption is done on your device, there isn't like as much trust as you think that you're putting in these providers, especially if they're open source and they're doing things properly, unlike LastPass. um, so where I'm going with this is yes, I'm totally like I didn't even know that Bitwarden was redesigning things. Once Bitwarden rolls out their changes, I'm probably going to try it out, and if I like it enough, then I might utilize it. And same with Proton Pass. So I'm kind of like open. I'm open to the idea of finding a better password manager that I really enjoy using. And I think it's either going to be Proton Pass or possibly a redesigned Bitwarden. So that's my password manager journey, and
Hmm.
that's why I said I couldn't directly answer it because I feel like there wasn't a direct answer there. But then it says at the end, Jonah can also share his thoughts here. Yes, he can.
Oh, thank you. So generous. I also recently found out about Bitwarden's mobile app redesign, and it sounds super cool because the way that their mobile apps work now is not my favorite, and switching to native iOS and Android code respectively will be a lot better for them, I think. Um, I am liking Proton Pass, the way that they're
Me too.
going quite a bit. They're adding features really quickly. They're adding things before Bitwarden is that people really want. And does Bitwarden support passkeys yet? Do you know? I can't
I
remember.
don't know. I know that
Um,
Proton Pass. Is that what you just said? They just rolled it out.
they, uh, I know they did just roll it out, yes. And I was just thinking that, um, I think they did it before Bitwarden, but now I don't think that's true. I think Bitwarden does have that, but whatever. They're adding a lot of features that I really like, and I would really there's reasons that I'm not going to personally switch password managers, but if I was going to choose a new password manager to start from scratch, I would definitely give Proton a really good consideration. I think they'd probably be my top choice right now, based on what they've done so far and based on how they're going. It's really seems to be a really solid product from them,
Yeah,
which is great.
I agree. It's, I think, one of the best Proton rollouts, actually. Proton Mail. I mean, if we
Yeah.
really start from the beginning, maybe not, but if we just like from the redesign in like what 2018 is when they did their redesign, I'd say from there Proton Mail has been pretty robust, and then I think Proton Pass has been their smoothest rollout so far. Um, Most other things move a little slower.
You know what I think it is? I think it's the simple login team,
Yeah,
since they're the ones
that's
behind
it.
it.
Yeah, it's
I
just
think
them.
that they're just a lot better at this kind of thing than
Yeah,
Proton is.
yeah. It's probably
So
like
I'm
it's a
glad that they're working with Proton now.
yeah. I agree. Like that's the vibe I get too. Is like my behind the scenes communication is also like it's mostly with like the simple login people when they're talking about Proton Pass. So they're doing a great
Yeah,
job. Gotta
it's
say.
the same on my end.
Yeah.
We'll move on to this next question from Clem.
Patron and
Hello,
regular.
Henry and Shona.
Yeah.
Patron and regular, pretty awesome. Two thumbs up.
Yeah.
So the Department of Justice has filed a lawsuit against Apple. As someone who uses Apple products, this definitely has my interest, and I'm sure it's a hot topic. What does this lawsuit mean for us, the privacy community? What does this lawsuit mean for the average Apple user? Are we going to see any immediate changes to how we interact with Apple services or products?
It's a big
Um,
question.
uh, the last question, really quick, I can say almost certainly we're not going to see any immediate changes to how we interact with Apple services. If Apple in the EU has shown us anything, it's that Apple will drag their feet for as long as humanly possible on making any changes whatsoever. So, if any changes need to be made, it's we're looking like way down the road.
Right.
But do you have any thoughts on how this lawsuit will impact the privacy community? To be honest, I haven't really looked into all of the specifics of this lawsuit, like what they're going after. I just know that they're going after a bunch of different things Apple is doing, and it's all a part of this like Sherman antitrust law.
Right. I haven't directly looked into it, but what I've heard is that it's almost they're at least utilizing a lot of what's happening in the EU as a baseline for what they're
Hmm.
going after. So everything that you've heard about with Apple in the EU is likely a similar thing that the DOJ is coming after as well. And I think what's really special about this is that the EU is forcing Apple to do all these changes in the EU, and finally there's an excuse now for other countries to go, hey, how come now you have different products in different countries that comply differently? You're able to offer a service that's maybe more privacy respecting, that offers more options in this country. Why can't you do it in our country as well? And the EU is putting in that work to make it happen, and they're the first people doing it. And so the DOJ, it's making life a little bit easier for them, but I really wouldn't be super confident in how short term this is going to be. I think this is going to be something as massive as like the Microsoft situation decades ago, which, as far as I know, was not resolved in 1 or 2 years. It's the kind of thing where I think that this is going to maybe change a lot of things for Apple in a decade, where maybe in a decade Apple will no longer be able to close its wall as significantly as it does now. So maybe I think it'll indirectly benefit the privacy community, but not directly. There's nothing in this that I've seen that's directly applicable to privacy, but it's a ton of things that revolve around it, giving users more options for privacy oriented browsers and allowing them to make a better choice, giving more power to privacy tools so that they can improve on the operating system. So maybe your email provider can better hook into your operating system. Maybe we can see a better contacts, like an end to end encrypted contacts provider, if Apple better opens up how you can hook into the contacts app on your phone. I think it's those kind of things that could benefit the privacy community, but from what I've seen, this isn't a direct benefit to the privacy world. But I'm still fully in support of it because, like, screw Apple, right? And screw any big company that's using its influence to control people like this. So, um, yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah, I really, I just don't think that we can really predict how this is going to go because if you look back to like the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, the US was very hard on monopolies like this. They sued AT&T, they sued Microsoft. Like they were really going after these tech companies. And then for a very long time, until pretty much just now, they have really taken a weak stance against monopolies, especially in the tech industry, but like in general, pretty much. And is this the beginning of a comeback? And are they going to go after monopolies harder starting from now on? And are they going to really go after Apple? Or is this all going to blow over and they're not really going to put too much of a fight into this and Apple will just prevail? I really have no idea what to expect from this because it's pretty unprecedented in the last like 15, 20 years, I would say, for something like this to happen. It doesn't seem to be something that they've been going after recently, and they seem to be starting it up again. So
Yeah.
that's all I'll say.
Yeah. Also, just to finalize that, my hot take, I think that every major tech company that you can list off today has a lot more power and influence than Microsoft ever did 30 years ago. And so I don't know what
Absolutely.
that means. I think it's a much bigger uphill battle now because like the kind of things they were going after Microsoft for feel so minor in comparison to what we see today. Honestly.
Hmm.
So I feel like it's a bigger uphill battle. They have a lot of fights to pick over like the smallest things. So and the biggest things. And just a quick check in. I see all the live chats, so I'm pulling them up right here. I see all your guys' comments. If we have some time after we get through the forum comments, then we'll try to knock out as many of those as possible. But we'll see you all as soon as we can. Let's try to roll through these next few. Do you mind closing the thread? And we can finish out.
Yeah, I can do
Cool.
that.
Thank you. Um, Toaster asked a question. What privacy respecting app do you recommend for organizing your life and GTD? Jonah asked me before the stream what GTD is, and I was like, go throw Danny or something. I don't know, something with Danny. I guess Danny, but it's something to do with like note taking. It's a note taking system. Get it done. I don't know what it was, but essentially organizing things, task management. They use Notesnook and Proton Calendar, but they don't like them because they want better organization. What do you think about Obsidian, and what are the best ways to sync it? How bad for privacy is Notion? Is there any privacy respecting app similar to Ample Note that allows you to create tasks and then drag them onto a calendar? So okay, I'm gonna ease into this on my end by discussing the how bad it for privacy is Notion. Notion doesn't guarantee you that much privacy, right? There's no end-to-end encryption. I don't think they have the most privacy respecting privacy policy. They tell you that pretty transparently, but what I tell people is, and what does that mean for your specific situation? If you're using Notion to run a YouTube channel and you're using it to organize your videos that are going to end up being public anyway, is that a big deal? Perhaps not. Are you using Notion to journal and start like sharing very sensitive things? Maybe it's a bigger deal for you. Are you using Notion to store sensitive documents for your company? That probably should be a big deal for you. So, again, always think of the context of what you're storing. So, the first thing I would ask is, what are you using these things for? If you're not using them for anything inherently sensitive, then I would say you can probably get away with using more privacy invasive services like Notion, which again, I don't broadly recommend to everybody. I don't recommend Notion from a privacy perspective, but just keep context in mind here. Um, and when it comes to like organizing my life, I guess I can comment and say I used to use Todoist. Recently, I've been using Things a lot. I really like Things. And Things, the only thing I don't like about Things is that it doesn't sync via like built-in cloud options. You have to use Things cloud syncing, but for what I use Things for, that's fine. Todoist was another option, but it has the same limitation. I really would like to see something that might sync over like iCloud if you're in the Apple ecosystem, or something that syncs over Google Drive if you're in the Google ecosystem. So at least like you have some ownership of the data and you don't have to go through their own proprietary syncing option. I am not as familiar with Obsidian to know like the best options to sync, but I'm pretty sure Obsidian Sync is end-to-end encrypted if I remember off my memory. I don't want to like really lock that in because I don't remember, but I'm fairly certain Obsidian Sync is end-to-end encrypted. Um, but someone definitely fact check that before like going with it. I don't know if I answered the question, but all I'll say, I didn't like Proton Calendar. Um, I just don't. It just doesn't beat like most other calendar clients that I've used, unfortunately. And I really wanted to like it because it's overall good. It's just not as good. Someone in the stream said Obsidian's end-to-end encrypted, so take that for what it's worth. I don't know. Do you? I feel like you don't have an organization system. I feel like you're I just figure it out day by day kind of person.
You're definitely more qualified to talk about all this note-taking stuff than I am, so I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'd say get creative because I'm still trying to find things on my end. Someone asked what calendar do I use? I use like built-in calendars on my devices at this point because I really want to use a third-party calendar because it's easier to migrate to different operating systems. But now I'm just using the built-in calendars on all my devices, and I'm using like different syncing methods to sync them across. It's not ideal, but I really want Proton Calendar to be better because it's honestly like it has the potential to definitely be like the best option. I think from like balancing privacy, security, and usability.
Mhm.
All right.
Moving on to Philip Johansson's question. Hello, Henry, Jonah, and YouTube chat. Happy Easter to those who celebrate. Both Obtainium and EFF's AP Keep support. AP EFF's AP Keep. I haven't used EFF AP Keep. Is
It's a
that an
way to
app to
download
download APK files?
APKs away from the Google Play Store.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I haven't looked into that. Both of these apps support downloading apps from the Huawei App Gallery without login credentials. Apps in that store are designed to be used on the Huawei phones that are forcibly de-Googled due to a US embargo on Huawei. This means that some popular apps have versions on there that do not require Google Play services, enabling another option for those having trouble de-Googling because they rely on some specific app that refuses to work with MicroG or Sandbox Google Apps, or for users that simply don't want to use those workarounds. This seems like a great option, but somehow I see no one mentioning it. Am I missing some kind of downside to the situation? Um, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but I would just say I don't know anything about how the Huawei App Store works, who has like the signing keys for the apps that are uploaded there, that kind of thing. So I really have no idea how trustworthy that is as a source of
Yeah,
apps.
also I have to assume that Huawei, this is my assumption, maybe it's incorrect, but I have to assume that Huawei likely has its own alternative to Google Play services. Because otherwise, what that's saying is the developers are going to have to develop their own push notification service for all their apps just to be uploaded to the Huawei store or something like that. And I assume like a lot of other things that would hook into the phone's API, like traditionally what would be Google Play Store APIs, have to be replaced with something else to make the development easier, is my assumption. But these are all assumptions. So I don't know. I'm just gonna come forward and say I really have no idea. But it sounds like a great idea. And if like your assumptions seem to be like headed in the right direction and maybe they're all accurate, but we don't know going into this. So it's something we have to look more into.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and only two more before we go into the live chat. We'll get to all of you very shortly. Another one from Clem, patron and regular. They're thinking about changing their phone number. They want to port their number. They're thinking about Google Voice. They're thinking about MySudo, which is a VoIP provider like Google Voice. But they're saying it doesn't make sense to make a new Google account just for this. Um, you know, so should I do it? It feels weird going to make an account with Google. I don't think there's a wrong answer. I'll start by just saying that. I just don't think there's a wrong answer. I think me 5 years ago would have said just try to avoid the Google account if you can. Me now would say I don't see the harm in having a Google account you never log into that's used to just hold your old phone number, and then that old phone number you can get email notifications for, which, like you said, could forward to your Proton account. So if someone accidentally texts your old number, you're going to get an email notification for it, and you can let them know, hey, heads up, I'm actually using this new phone number now. And as long as the Google account is compartmentalized, you're not using it for anything that's super sensitive, it's stored in your password manager and you almost never log in. It's also just nice to have a Google account because some services literally require SSO registration nowadays. Like a good example of that, I guess no, they do allow an email in my head. I was thinking of Tailscale, but there are some services that almost at this point require an SSO provider to log in with, and having that spare Google account could be just a nice backup option for you that you don't by default use for anything outside of just using it as a forwarding provider for your Google Voice account. I actually really like Google Voice. I think it's my favorite VoIP provider in a lot of ways, but MySudo would work as well. The only problem with MySudo is now you're talking about de-Googling from your personal life, but if you go with MySudo, setting up MySudo on a de-Googled phone is also a challenge. So you're going to have to pick and choose your battles here, I think.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add?
I don't have much to add.
Okay.
I don't have this set up myself, so
Ooh, and the next one's perfect for you.
Emo Giraffe 516 asks, I really want to self-host my own email, but I heard that most of the emails received from it will probably be marked as spam for people using big tech email services like Gmail and Outlook. Does this problem even have any solution? Um, I really think that like the issues with self-hosting email are kind of overblown in a sense because if you use a service like MailCow, which sets everything up properly for you in one click, so you don't have to configure like postfix and everything yourself, and you set up all the DNS records that are appropriate for email, which MailCow guides you through, or a program like that. I've never run into any issues like this with any email hosting that I've ever done. You just have to set it up correctly. And there are definitely email programs where if you're not just doing every single aspect of it DIY on your own, there are pre-made solutions that work perfectly fine. That being said, I still probably wouldn't recommend self-hosting email because it doesn't make a lot of sense from like a time or cost perspective. Setting it all up and keeping it up to date and keeping it running is all stuff that you really have to do, and it's still a lot of work even when you're doing it correctly. And for the cost of like pretty much any email provider, which is usually like $5, $10 a month, it's you're gonna get a lot better value out of just having somebody else do it for you. That's kind of the state that email is in right now. So I probably wouldn't recommend it to most people, but it's definitely possible. You just have to set it up correctly.
Yeah, it feels risky too. Like that's why I don't self-host my own email because like we use Proton for our business email. So if you email our support page or something, it's going to go through Proton. But it's also like even from a business perspective, it's I don't want the liability to have to manage my own email, right? Like if I screw something up, if I don't update something on time because I'm traveling and I want to have a life outside of managing my email, that's where I think
Right.
feels feel a little risky to me. So I feel like if you're somebody who wants to tinker, I think the big thing for me is if you want to tinker, if you want to learn how email works, there's no better way to do it than to self-host your own email, and you're gonna learn a lot about how email works. You're gonna like get down and dirty. It's a great learning experience. And also maybe you can use it for a few things that aren't very important, just for fun. But I do think that just keep that in mind. Keep in mind the liability and that you are taking ownership of all of your email data when you do that, which is a good thing, right? Because you're owning all your data. But also just keep in mind you have to maintain it, as you said.
Yeah.
I feel like I just repeated what you said
Yeah,
mostly,
what
but
you just said was exactly what I was about to say, which is that I mean, yeah, it's just something that you should do if you're interested in self-hosting email, but it's not something that you should do as a general rule. And I definitely didn't really have any problems when I self-hosted email, and I hosted my own email for a very long time. But I've also just switched all of my email over to Proton, and I'm perfectly happy with that decision. And it's a lot better now that I don't need to self-host anymore.
nice. All right, that's all we got for the forum, and now we have the live chat. So we'll probably keep this going for about 5 or 10 minutes ish. We'll see how we're doing. But welcome everyone in the live chat. Thanks for still being active despite us just not being there for you and ignoring you for an hour. So sorry, but we're finally at you. So someone said that banks. Back to what we said when we talked about banks. Someone said that many banks in Germany have their own Apple Pay alternatives, which work very well. So, like you said, seems like some banks in
Hmm.
Europe seem to do that, which is really cool. Someone asked, I'm gonna like reframe their question. Someone directly asked, where is the place to find FOSS when you don't know how to read it yourself? I'm gonna reframe the question a little bit and say, how do you know to download trustworthy open source software?
Are you asking? You're not going to answer it. You're just going to
I
ask
mean,
it to
yeah,
me.
I'm starting by asking it to you, and I can, yeah,
Um, this is the case with all computing, which is that at the end of the day, you either need to either trust the developers are pushing out what they say they're pushing out, or you have to check it yourself. But there's really no, you can't rely on anybody perfectly to vet all of these things. That's the unfortunate truth with all computing and with all products. I think it's just a general rule when you're doing anything that you don't do yourself, that there is some reliance on someone else doing it for you. Um, and so, like we just saw with the XE stuff, for example, sometimes things sneak by which nobody would have ever caught. And I don't, I say this, but I don't think that that's a reason to not use all of these products. I think that if you're using stuff that's reasonably like maintained, and you can look at like if they have a GitHub page, see how often people are using it, see how many stars it has, maybe see how many issues there are and how active they are at responding to that kind of thing, etc. It's even though stuff like this happens sometimes where products aren't what they say they are, by and large, you're gonna be fine with
Right.
most of these mainstream products.
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing I have to add to that is I've talked about this in the past, but I've become a lot more wary of very small projects that are run by, I'd say, like 1 to 3 developers, especially if it's like a what you think of when you think of an open source project, which is there's no like revenue source, there's no business model. It's not the kind of thing that's run by maybe 5 people, but it's like, a full blown organization. They have to be 24/7 ready to go. The reason I say that is, was it Bromite? I want to say it was either Bromite or Frenek, but there was an Android browser, and I want to say it was like over holiday break. There was an urgent security update that had to be pushed out, and they received it like 2 or 3 weeks after everyone else received it. And I know Bromite's not even a thing anymore, and now it's Chromite. I don't know what's going on with that, but my point is, like, you have to remember that if you're going through a small open source project that's only being run by 1 or 2 people, especially if it's one person, you're completely dependent on one person to be online all the time to deal with serious issues that might come up. Just be aware of that. And also, if something happens to that person, what if they end up in the hospital? Like, we don't want that to happen, but what do you do then? You have to hope that someone else steps up and takes the reins, and you have to trust their vision as well. So just be aware of that with open source projects. That's kind of why I have migrated away from like very small things run by just several people. Um, just being in this space for so long, there's been so many projects now that I've had to move my data away from, and I don't want to keep doing that.
Yeah, that's totally valid. You just have to remember that, like with open source projects like that, it's literally not their job in
Yeah,
almost all cases to work on this.
yeah,
And so y- there
you
you
can't
do
blame them.
have to, yeah, you can't blame
Like, I'm
them.
not
There's
upset.
some kind of acceptance that you have to have where maybe this project will just be unmaintained someday, and you have to keep an eye on that and be prepared to switch to something else, especially when it comes to small stuff like that. So
Yeah, I think that's
just
a
how it is.
healthy perspective going into it to have, is like you can appreciate it, you can do it, but just be aware it might not exist forever. So appreciate it more, and maybe give more monies to open source projects while you're using them, so they're more likely to stick around.
Yeah.
If you see any questions, definitely call them out. I have one I see, unless you already see one.
Unknown asked,
Oh, I
what's
had the
your
same one.
opinion on Mullvad running on routers, and would you say it's private and secure considering it's based in Sweden? Well, I do think Mullvad is a great VPN option, and I really don't see why running it on a router would make a huge difference compared to running it on your device or whatever. Um, yeah, it's definitely a VPN option. It's one that's been recommended here on the channel before. Um, and so I don't think you can go wrong with it if you need a VPN. I don't
Yeah,
know if you have other thoughts.
no, it's one of the best VPNs, I think, from a privacy perspective to go with. And you can save a device
Oh,
if you're running it on your router and you don't set it up on your desktop or something, and it also goes through your phone. As long as it's compatible and you set it up properly, seems awesome. Um,
Philip Johansson said, Punkt ARC incoming. I don't know about that new Punkt phone. I don't know if we've talked about it on the channel yet, but
is
have
that
you
the
looked
one
at
that
the
runs like more
like
proper Android?
smartphony one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I, well, we talked about like we just want more details over. It's based on an operating system that we know about, but we just don't know the details around it. And it's definitely interesting for Punk to come out with it's a smartphone, right? Because even if it doesn't come with smartphone apps, you can definitely install smartphone apps onto it. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Like maybe
Yeah.
because the main complaint I had with the Punk that I have, the little blue one, like the one that looks like a little toy, the dumb phone, which it does. I think it's beautiful. It's a beautiful phone, but it only runs Signal, and there's no way if you wanted a Maps program, just the Maps program, that's no longer an option for that phone. So, but it seems very expensive for what it is, and I haven't seen any coverage of it myself, but I wasn't really looking for it either. I just don't know what market it's trying to fill, I think. But
Yeah,
I wish
it's
them luck.
weird. When I think of Punkt, I really think of like it's almost kind of more design over function products where they have things that are very minimal and look nice.
They
But
do
the
look very nice.
smartphone that they have just looks like I kind of don't agree that the design is very good. It looks like an AliExpress smartphone that you can buy and load a custom OS on.
Yeah,
And I'm not saying
you,
that's what they're doing, but
you,
it's not.
you said it, not me, but I do
It's a weird
agree.
product for this specific company to come out with, I would say.
It feels very off-brand for them. Is yeah, I that's how I
Yeah.
would put it. I would put it as like it's very off-brand for Punkt to release that phone from a design perspective, from a functionality perspective. Yeah, I agree. But
Yeah.
if anyone has experience with it, definitely let us know. We'd love to hear. Um, I'll tackle this. I've done it before. Someone even said Henry's been vocal on this in the past, but someone asked, "What are my opinion on Rob Braxman and all the products?" And they also say, "Why have they not been recommended anywhere else but him?" Um, to answer that, well, we stick with more of like community-based recommendations, and they like it. I'll use this as an example because it's more objective data, but you can check out our VPN page at techlore.tech/VPN, and actually that VPN is on there, and you'll see why we don't recommend it because it just isn't comparable whatsoever to the more trustworthy options out there. Now, again, we just talked about trust versus verify. There's not much verification we can do for these services, nor do people seem to do because they just don't. So, from a verification perspective, they're not things we want to recommend. And so, if you trust the person putting these products out, then sure, go ahead. But we just don't have many compelling reasons to see them as very trustworthy, especially when I don't know how popular it is, but like the Brax Messenger was advertised as having end-to-end encryption when it just didn't. It's little things like that that are a big deal that people don't talk about, and so you really have to make sure you're using trusted software. And there's already so many great options that fill these roles. Like there's so many great VPNs that are open source that are run by like 24/7 like organizations that have been doing this for over a decade. And same thing with custom ROMs, same thing with mail. Like we have amazing mail options that have built-in end-to-end encryption, which I don't believe that has. Um, so yeah, it's not that you can't use it if you don't trust it, but like you have to understand why we're not going to recommend this based on like the information we have. Um, so I don't know if you have anything to add there, but like we really have to like vet things properly because we're recommending products to so many people, and I just haven't seen any compelling reason why these are better or in any not
Yeah.
even for functionality perspective. So
It's it's a really weird segment of YouTube to me that I don't fully understand, which is these like very niche tech people only making videos about like their own products. I saw another channel, somebody sent me a video that they made, and it was basically an ad for like their remote computing service where you can like rent a web browser in the cloud and use it, and they were selling the subscription or whatever. And I don't really understand why
that's fair.
why these people are making all these products and making all these videos about it. I guess it works out for them, but it's usually not like the quality of the products along this line that I've seen are not really like they're not to the same quality of other products made by dedicated companies who have been doing this for much longer and have much larger teams, like you were saying. It's just a matter of like they're they seem to be offering these services because they are like on their face very affordable to run, and so you can make like a decent profit margin, but you're not really going a step above and beyond what everyone else is doing to make a compelling product that people will actually want to use. Like the bare minimum in most of these cases when it comes to a smartphone, when it comes to a messaging app, when it comes to any of like these kinds of products, you have to go above and beyond that and make something that's better. And most of these creators who are offering services like this don't seem to be going that extra mile, and they're just basically rebranding stuff that already exists and selling subscriptions to it. That seems to be the trend that I've noticed, anyways, and it's just not very compelling to me.
Right. Yeah. And again, we're not saying not to use a specific thing. If you like it and it works for you and you feel like it fits in your threat model and you trust it, by all means, please do. We're not here to tell you what not to do necessarily, but we're going to share why we don't recommend it either. Um, yeah. And also, I just want to say that, like, we've explored developing things and creating products and all this. It's a lot of freaking work. So I also don't want to discount the amount of work someone's putting into this stuff, because us running all these different things sounds like a lot of work, and so massive props to them. But it's just hard for us to like comfortably recommend it when again there's just so many better, more trustworthy options that have been vetted by like top tier security privacy experts in the space that are well above our pay grade, who know what the hell they're talking about. So yeah, I think we beat that. And so someone said I was very vocal. I guess we were vocal again. But um, yeah, let's see. Is someone asked, is 2FA worth the time? Almost always, yes. Use 2FA. Passwords get breached all the time. They're not the best thing in the world by themselves, but when you combine a password with 2FA, you normally have some pretty top-notch security just with that simple step. So use 2FA. So lonely in chat.
Someone talking about the Huawei App Store apps being behind on updates and being untrustworthy. That's definitely like would be my main concerns as well. You even see it with alternative app stores like the Amazon store, for example, where apps just don't get the same kind of attention from the developers that they do on the App Store, Google Play Store. That's just how it goes, and it wouldn't surprise me if they do run behind on updates. A lot of app stores, like the Play Store, for example, do signing of the source code remotely on their cloud. I don't know if Huawei does that, but if they do, I would also be concerned about them adding things to the source code on their end that the developer might not intend because the signings on their side. That's a potential problem with a lot of different app stores, and the Huawei would be no exception. So I'd have to look into how that works. But it's definitely not something that I would like recommend for sure you should do. But if you look into it and it looks good to you, um, it could be an option, but it's probably something that would have to be evaluated on a case by case basis.
Nice.
Good. No reason to really go back into that topic again, just to add that.
Yeah. I see, because we're already 15 minutes over. I see two questions that look good, and maybe we can end it there. The first one is, where is it? Opinions on Mullvad having servers they own versus rent. So they're pretty much asking, does VPN server versus renting matter? And the second one is iCloud with advanced data protection versus like the Google ecosystem, especially for photos. So sorry, people. If we had more time, we would definitely try to address all of these. But we're going to go ahead and knock those two out, and then we'll start doing our outro. But thank you all for engaging. We still appreciate the engagement, and you're all awesome for being here. Um, so first question about owning versus renting a VPN server. I personally don't look at this. I think that it's very cool. It's very nifty. I think it shows commitment from a VPN provider to even try to offer their own hardware that they roll themselves. I think that they do have more control over the hardware. There might be some benefits there, but they're all hypothetical benefits. In theory, Mullvad is also, if they're renting infrastructure, they're also still having a huge amount of control over the infrastructure there as well. So inherently, I don't think anything changes here, and I would argue that it actually could free up the Mullvad resources for them to be able to implement more things that do matter, rather than having to roll over their own hardware in every server around the world. And it also allows people who use the service to access countries they normally can't access. So it's much harder to run your own hardware if you're a VPN company versus renting from somebody who still gives you pretty much all the same control. That's what I've seen. Mullvad seems to believe that because Mullvad isn't going to compromise on user safety. They just have such a spotless reputation. And the fact that they even give you the option is really solid. So I would say, as always, I'm going to turn it back around your direction. If you really care about, them owning their servers and you have a good reason for that, then sure, go ahead and pick only servers that they own. They have a whole list and it tells you exactly online. If you go to Mullvad servers, it'll tell you which servers are owned versus rented. But it's not something I'm looking at. I don't know if you do something similar.
I I totally agree that I don't think it's gonna make a difference realistically, but I will just add and point out that Mullvad does say on their website, like on their about their servers page, that their owned servers tend to be more secure by their standards. And so if you want to take that at face value, it's definitely something that you should consider. But
Nice.
I think we're talking about like really minor differences, and I think that for most people it's not going to matter. So you just have to decide if it matters to you, but I think it's fine either way.
Nice. Cool stuff. I didn't know they actually formally said that, so that's really cool to know.
They do, yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. I think Mullvad might even directly answer your question better than we did. But yeah. And I'm actually gonna combine because it's from the same person, unknown, and they asked, "What's your opinion on iCloud Relay and its privacy features?" And they also asked, "Is iCloud with advanced data protection a good idea instead of Google Photos?" I'll start by kind of saying I think for just average people who use an iPhone, they're overall pretty solid features. In fact, I'd say iCloud Relay is like, it's 50-50. Probably just use a VPN. You'll probably be better off. But if it's included in your Apple subscription and you only want it in your browser, then maybe it's fine. I think it's fine for that purpose. But you're probably going to be better off using like an actual VPN from a more reputable company that's, again, focused on just building a VPN provider, as we talked about earlier as well. Where I really am a huge fan, I love advanced data protection. I think it's one of the best things that Apple's done in a long time. That with lockdown mode, I think is like top tier Apple decisions for the last, like, in my eyes, decade. And I think that my favorite thing is that it is truly a extremely good, compelling alternative to Google Photos. I think in my eyes, like the three alternatives to Google Photos right now that have any kind of emphasis on privacy and security are hosting it yourself with Synology, so Synology NAS, Ente Photos, and iCloud Photos with advanced data protection. And they're all going to have pros and cons, right? Like one, you own yourself, it's your own photos, but it doesn't really, I guess, have end-to-end encryption directly unless you set it up certain ways, I'd assume. And then there's Ente that is end-to-end encrypted, but I do think as much as I love Ente, like they're still building it out, and I think they're still try to match those Google Photos features. And dude, the Apple offering, like, come on, there's no way. Like, it pretty much has like all of Google Photos features, but with end-to-end encryption already built in, and it does a lot of its stuff locally as well. Like a lot of the Apple, it has to be locally because it's end-to-end encrypted. So especially for an average user, like friends and family, I think everybody should be telling them, like, if they're already on an iPhone, especially, just enable ADP if you think it's safe for them and they're not going to lose their keys. And now they have end-to-end encrypted photos. They won't even know. That's how good it is. They won't know. So I think it's awesome. And I'm not like again, Apple has a lot of issues. So not here to say Apple's perfect, but I think they knocked it out of the park with advanced data protection. And even advanced data protection has other issues. It's not a perfect tool, but it's pretty solid. All right, I'm done rambling. I'll leave it in your court now to finish it out.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I, it's obviously better than Google Photos, though. I mean, they're not even
Mm-hmm.
comparable in my mind. Google Photos is almost a completely different product because it's like basically the AI cloud version of photo management, whereas all of these other tools are just like photo backup, but everything else is run locally, and that's a huge difference in my mind. I don't. Google will do scan and do whatever they want to all of your photos on their cloud, and that's basically how the service works. It works fundamentally differently than all of these other services. Like even iCloud without advanced data protection, well, I don't think you should use it for photo backup. They're not scanning your photos or modifying your photos in any way. It's still all being processed locally. If you like consider the photo search in the app, for example, that's not going to the cloud, so Apple doesn't know what you're searching for, that kind of thing. Um, of course, you should still use advanced data protection, but I'm just saying that it was made fundamentally very differently than Google Photos, so it's no question to me that it's always going to be better than Google Photos will be, because Google Photos, there's no way to make it good.
Yeah. Yeah, you really have no options to try to like make Google Photos secure. It's not even like Google Drive where maybe you can try using something like Cryptomator. So at least you kind of have like a document encrypted in Google Drive.
Hmm.
I don't know what options you have for Google Photos. You're just stuck with uploading all of your data to Google servers. And again, if it's for something not sensitive, maybe that's fine. But yeah, you're right. It's like all cloud processing. It's all just directly going to Google servers. And I like Apple just works very differently from that in this specific realm of things. And with especially with
Yeah.
ADP. So I think unless you're going to self-host your own NAS, I think the only options that you reasonably have to get away from Google Photos is iCloud with advanced data protection or something like Ente Photos. I think those are your two options. But yeah, we're already an hour and 20. Well, no, we're already 20 over our hour, not an hour and 20 over. But that's all we got this month. So again, we really can't be doing this without people on Patreon. And I really want to mention before you leave, we have a Signal group now because Signal released usernames and it allows you to hide your phone number. We haven't publicized it much because of that limitation, so we kept it a pretty low-key patron perk. But that is a thing. So you can join a whole group chat on Signal with a ton of other people who care about digital rights, privacy, and security. That's the community that Jonah and I are probably like the most active on. I know I'm like it's on my Signal phone that I carry with me everywhere I go, and so I try my best to like just check in on like the patrons there. And I'm trying to get 100 people on there, and I think we're at like at least 30, 40 around there. So if you just join our Patreon at patreon.com/Techlore, you'll be able to join our Signal group by going through that, and you'll get access to a little fun community. Um, and you don't have to share your phone number with any other members. So yeah, that's kind of the thing I want to advertise. The small thing I'm going to advertise for this whole live stream. The other thing I'll say, this one's free, but you can join our forum as always at discuss.techlore.tech. Again, that's where you're going to get a lot of updates to not just things like the Linux backdoor, but just any other news. You can follow this with RSS, so you don't even need an account if you just want to follow the news without needing an account through the forum. And that's all I'm going to have to say. So you can join our Patreon down below. You can join our forum down below. And I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank Jonah for being here. As always, I super appreciate all your input with all you do. And thank you all for tuning in and leaving your comments. That's all I got.
See ya.
See ya. All right, I'm going to click this.